And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Rupert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection. I'm your host, Rupert Pictou. Built in the early 1950s, Kenny Dam is a rock-filled embankment dam on the Nechako River. The impoundment of water behind the dam forms the Nechako Reservoir, commonly known as Ootsa Lake. On today's Open Connection, we open our archives to bring you this story from 1989.
The first phase of this massive project was nearly 40 years ago, and as the new reservoir was filled, private homes in the area had to be moved to make way for the rising waters. Among them was the family home of the Vantines. They'd been in the area long before a project like this one was ever dreamt of.
Yeah, they were here and grew up here in 1919, homesteaded at Ootsa Lake, which their original home was flooded in 1952 by Alcan. And then we moved there up onto higher ground.
What was involved with that as far as family disruption goes? You had to move your entire house, I understand.
The whole, yes, all the whole buildings, everything, lock, stock, and barrel.
Now, 4 decades later, Jim Vantine and his wife Arlene, who live in that same house that was moved once before, are bracing themselves for more changes in Ootsa Lake. After Camano completion, the level of the lake could be drawn down up to 27 feet over a series of dry years. That kind of drawdown means exposing land that is usually underwater. In essence, moving the lake away from the people who live on its shore.
Yes, it will be away from the lake if they drop it too far, but we'll have quite a little spot there. It'll be useless to anybody on account of the soil eruption and everything.
But this time there is a difference. Alcan itself notified people of the potential changes and has stated it will pay for what it calls out-of-pocket expenses that result from lowering the lake. Alcan's vice president in BC, Bill Rich.
The notion is we don't think people should and don't want people to have to pay out-of-pocket costs to adapt some of their equipment and facilities as a result of changes that we make. And these can be things like water intakes. A number of people have wharves. Some people have wells. I suppose that's more along the river than around the lake because they don't have very good well facilities there. But it's that notion that we don't feel it right that if we make changes in the reservoir operation that there's out-of-pocket costs that have to be paid. Now we want to identify what they are. We want them to be legitimate, and everybody's going to play the game honestly. But at the end of the day, that's what we're prepared to pay for.
So on a year-to-year basis, once the project is complete, the actual drawdown won't be much different. The fear is that over dry years there could be a continual drawdown.
That's right. We seem to have, I'm not a hydraulics expert, we do know that reservoir areas around the world have wet years and dry years. What we seem to have here is a pattern where the dry years come in bunches. And we had a period in the 1940s that was relatively dry. Then we had virtually 30 years of relatively normal but adequate water. And now we've been through another 7 or 8 years that looks very comparable to the 1940s. And what happens is during normal years, we actually have no more variation than we have now, perhaps about 6 feet from the high to the low. But if we get a number of dry years together, the reservoir slowly works its way down. It may take 4 or 5 years to get there. And it's in those periods of time where the drawdown will be deep enough that it will affect existing water intakes. But we have to plan for that because you don't know when it'll happen. I mean, we think we've been through one. There's a very high snowpack this year. We may be out of it, but you can get back into it again at any time. So we need to leave the situation so people could cope with that dry period if it came again.
When Lakeshore residents received letters from Alcan advising of the changes, public meetings were called. Eric Schroff is a spokesperson for the residents group.
The first meeting that we had, we got a turnout of about 55 people, which was quite remarkable for this country because everybody works on different schedules. Most people are self-employed and come and go at different times. So it was quite a good indication that there was a lot of concern. The first public meeting we had generated a request to Alcan for another public meeting with Alcan representatives present, which was held about a month later. Again, we got in excess of 50 people at the meeting, and at that time we set up a steering committee to work on behalf of the residents with a steering group from Alcan to tune things up a little bit so that we would actually have some concrete information to take back to the population at large.
What are the major concern areas that you see if there is a drawdown over a series of years? What physical problems are going to result, or do you anticipate resulting?
Well, the first line concerns are the local residents as far as water supply for domestic and animal usage, access to the lake for recreation and or business concerns such as gyms. It'd be very difficult to launch boats unless we have facilities in place to take care of that. The concerns that go beyond the immediate ones are things like cattle movement. The lake and or the river will not be natural barriers as it was in the past. Cows and wildlife will have to go further for water out to the new reservoir level, let's say, and we anticipate problems with bogging down and just general movement of cows up and down the lakeshore where they've been restricted in the past.
All of these concerns are based on a maximum predicted drawdown, and it seems that from year to year, Alcan predicts, unless there is a series of dry years, that the drawdown is going to be about what it is right now. Do you accept that?
Oh, I accept it, certainly. They've been very upfront with us about their plans and about the anticipated drawdowns. There are still problems involved, even with the general fluctuation of water levels that we have to deal with, because water lines will be exposed more, and that could lead to problems with freezing in the winter. And we still have to be most concerned with the maximum drawdowns anticipated, because we have to be ready to face that when and if it comes.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thanks for staying with us. Construction of the Kenny Dam involved flooding of 32,000 acres of land in order to create the Nechako Reservoir. This flooding impacted surrounding agricultural land and caused the loss of 8.7 million cubic meters of timber. Let us return to the archives as Jim Van Tine shares about the impacts on wildlife.
Well, that's going to be a problem with the wildlife on migration, especially in the springtime with cows. With the calves will be bogged down unless they can find a good steep bank, like in an old riverbed or something where there's not so much shoreline. They can cross there okay.
Van Tine makes his living as a guide outfitter on Ootsa Lake, south of Ootsa Lake. As such, he's traveled up and down Ootsa countless times to get to his territory. He says a real concern is the underwater forest of Ootsa Lake. In the days of the original project, it wasn't deemed necessary to log the reservoir basin, and so the dead trees remain, jutting through the surface of the lake. When the winds come up on the large lake, the tree tops act as a hazard to boaters, impeding them from reaching shore. Van Tine says if the lake drops significantly, it will mean a greater hazard.
Well, they would have to use extreme caution, mainly on the flooded rivers, the old riverbeds, where there'd be lots of snags and derbies floating around, underwater mainly, and a lot of submerged islands. It would be very hazardous to boating.
Ootsa Lake provides the northern access point to Tweedsmuir Provincial Park. Boaters travel down the lake to a Parks Branch rail portage where boats are winched through to Ootsa Lake. But Van Tine recommends people unfamiliar with the waters of Ootsa find someone to guide them through its hazardous waters. Meanwhile, Alcan continues its program of clearing parts of the lake of the dead trees. An underwater saw cuts off the trees, which are then hauled to shore and burned. The company has been clearing bays and areas of shelter. Bill Rich says that will continue throughout the completion project, and work done to date won't be negatively affected by drawing the lake down in future years.
That was one of the design features in developing that equipment, that at any time we're cutting, we want to be down 30 feet. Now, obviously, when they get close to shore, they have to start coming up so they don't damage the equipment. And that should still leave us a buffer, because we virtually have never had the reservoir right up to the top. So wherever they were cutting, they were still 30 feet below that. So we could draw down close to that 30 feet, and there should still be a margin of safety. Now, if we get down there, and it won't happen overnight, if it works its way down with helicopter flights and that, you can spot areas that might be too shallow. There may be places where we might have to go back and do a second cutting, but we've at least tried to use our equipment and design it that we'll always stay below that, even if we had to draw down very far.
Another facet of the Camano completion project is a cold water release facility at the Kenny Dam. Water to be released from the reservoir can be taken from the depths of the lake, mixed to the desired temperature with surface water, and released to the Nechako River. This facility means water no longer needs to be dumped at the Skins Lake spillway. But turning the water off at the spillway brings to mind some of the concerns already mentioned in connection to animal watering and barriers. This is a subject to be addressed between the residents group and Alcan. But despite the myriad of concerns, there is a spirit of cooperation between residents and Alcan. It comes in part from the realization that Ootsa Lake is indeed a working reservoir.
That's something that was brought forward quite emphatically by Alcan, and I think it was an approach that where maybe not appreciated by the local residents, brought things into focus a bit more. That is a reservoir. It's not a natural wilderness lake, and it is there for the generation of power.
There is also a sentiment that Alcan will make things right this time, that the earlier mistakes won't be repeated. Jim Vantine says he's satisfied with the approach taken by Alcan, though he remains concerned about what lies ahead if and when the lake that he's lived beside for his lifetime changes.
Kind of disappointment, but I'm sure that they'll take care of everything this time. When they first flooded, they just flooded and that was it. You do what you like. But now they're considering helping us out anyhow.
While work on Camano completion is now underway, the project still faces one more legal hurdle. The Rivers Defense Coalition has launched a court challenge of the agreement that allows the project to go ahead. The settlement agreement between Alcan and the federal and provincial governments was reached in September 1987. Rivers Defense says in signing that deal, the federal fisheries minister gave away his authority to govern water flows in the Nechako River. Recently, Alcan was granted intervenor status in that court action that has yet to be heard.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Although the interest in health, illness, and well-being of the young dates back to antiquity, the term pediatrics is relatively modern, originating in the latter half of the 19th century with the emergence of distinct and organized specialty within medicine. Let us return to the archives to bring you this story from 1989.
Our primary role is to take care of the children as far as making sure that they maintain a reasonable status, such as their temperatures within normal range. We provide physical care of the child, nutritional care, and we also do a lot of patient teaching, which is either talking to the child if they're old enough, or we discuss matters with their parents in many different areas.
You were mentioning earlier that nutrition is one of the big things that you deal with. What sort of things are you having to accomplish there?
Well, sometimes the parents are feeding their children what they perceive as the correct diet, and sometimes it's lacking in one or two essential nutrients, such as iron, for example. So what we do is basically re-educate the parents regarding the nutrient that's lacking, and then give them some guidelines on what to feed their child when they go home.
A lot of children also go home on medication. In hospital, the nurses look after administering the drugs, but at home, it's the parents who must know how.
Our job is mainly to make sure that the parent knows why the child is on the medication, how much medication the child should take, how often the child should take it, and we attempt to set up a time with them. If, for example, a medication is given 4 times a day, we would ask them what time would be suitable for them and actually set times so that medications are given prior to meals, following meals, or whenever it's indicated, and that's based on what type of drug the patient's on. Other things that we do is we make sure that people know how much medicine to give their child, and often drugs are prescribed in milligrams. So I'll just give you an example here. This is an antibiotic, and it says it's 125 milligrams for 5 milliliters. Now, 5 milliliters, even though we're all supposed to be metric, is actually 1 teaspoon. So it would be easier to explain to the parents that they should give 1 teaspoon of this medication.
Like on the maternity ward, nurses here also deal with emotions. The staff does its best to reassure parents and make their young patients feel safe.
We do encourage the parents to stay if they can, and we try and spend as much time as we can interacting with the child, making them feel comfortable, showing them around. With young children, we do spend a lot of time cuddling the children, as much time as we're able to within the amount of work that we have to do it in a day. And, you know, just comforting children for any type of procedure. And we put them in areas on the ward, even if they're in their cribs, where they can interact with people so that they don't feel lonely. Because often children are from a family of more than one child, and if you put them in a room by themselves, they're very lonely.
Another way of comforting young patients is to remove the fear of staying in hospital before they're admitted. Kindergarten children regularly tour the hospital with their classes.
Often children that are in kindergarten have actually been previous patients, and they're very earnest about telling their schoolmates that they have in fact been here and it's not such a bad place.
Back in the maternity ward, we find a nurse from outside the hospital also doing some rounds. Marianne Waters is a public health nurse.
And I first wanted to say congratulations on your new little guy. Are you familiar with health unit services?
Waters regularly visits new mothers at the hospital. She records the babies' names and briefs the mothers on such things as immunizations.
I'll give you one of these little pamphlets which explains a little bit about health unit services, and this is one of my business cards, so if you do have any questions, don't hesitate to give us a call. Also, when you get home from the hospital, there's often things that you didn't anticipate with this little guy while you were in the hospital, and the health unit is a place where you can ask some of those questions that may come up, and we get people who are saying, I don't know if this is normal, but, or I don't know if I should be concerned about this, but this is happening to my baby, so don't hesitate to call us.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Public health nursing services and programs focus on improving health and improving the quality of life among whole populations through health promotion, disease prevention, and other forms of health intervention. In this final segment of Open Connection, public health nurse Marianne Waters visits a new mom and their baby at their home.
Waters also makes appointments to visit new mothers once they've gone home. On this day, she's looking in on a mother and her 3-month-old baby boy. She's paying special attention to this family because the infant was born 5 or 6 weeks prematurely.
Starting to follow things with his eyes, the mobile above his crib.
Oh yeah, he likes that.
Watching things. Yeah.
He shuts up right away for the mobile, as soon as I shake it a little bit.
Yeah. That's really good for him. It gives his eyes something to focus on, and his eyes need practice of those sorts of things.
After the questions, out comes the scale.
I get him as 5 kilograms or 11 pounds on the nose.
A measuring tape is Waters' other tool. She measures the baby's length and head and checks his progress on a growth chart. This is Shani DeCuna's first child, and she finds Waters' visits a real relief.
Oh, yeah. I was really scared at the beginning, like I was even scared to touch him, and she helped me lots, and she told me lots of things that I couldn't even ask the doctor, so I just phoned her and tell her and ask her, And anything when I want to buy stuff like for him, and she helped me like lots, like for the crib and the nipples and stuff, things like that.
She provided you any reading material, that kind of thing, too?
Yeah, lots of books she brought me. She still brings me lots of books,
With home and hospital visits, public health nurses spend a lot of time out of the office. On this day, Waters adds another regular stop to her agenda. She visits various home and community nursery schools in Prince Rupert, including this one at Friendship House.
Georgina, I just wanted to drop off these pamphlets and booklets for the nursery school. I had spoken to Eleanor about them. She had requested some of your parenting pamphlets are running short, so I've got those for you, as well as the booklets called It Takes Time to Eat, which is to give some help with children with handicaps and their eating.
The Friendship House Nursery and others use a lot of information from the health unit.
Well, some of the things they do, like they give us a lot of information, like these pamphlets, to give out to parents, and for our own knowledge also on nutrition, dental care, different safety issues, discipline, that type of stuff. So if we have questions on allergies or immunization, they just come down and, we ask our questions. Or if we need to know that day, we just give them a phone call, and they're always very helpful.
On this visit, Waters and Michaud also exchanged notes on recent cases of chickenpox among the preschoolers. Waters suggests they keep track of the numbers so statistics are available when a vaccine against the illness is finally developed.
Generally, immunization starts at approximately 2 months of age, at which time they receive an immunization against diphtheria, whooping cough, and tetanus, an injection in their leg, polio, some pink syrup on the spoon. They receive that again at 4 months, and at 6 months get another dose of just the diphtheria, whooping cough, and tetanus. Following that, shortly after their first birthday, or as close to their first birthday as possible, they're due for immunization against measles, mumps, and rubella. At 18 months of age, they receive the new vaccine for Hib, Haemophilus influenza type B, somewhere between generally 18 and 24 months of age. As well, they are due for a booster for diphtheria, whooping cough, tetanus, and polio a year after what's called typically their 6-month shot, so at about that 18-month age as well. Then they're generally next due for immunization preschool, pre-kindergarten, at which time they receive a booster for diphtheria, whooping cough, tetanus, and polio one more time. Following that, most children are not due for routine immunization until a grade 9 level, at which time they receive tetanus and diphtheria, and then as a Canadian adult should receive a booster every 10 years thereafter for those two diseases. Because we very rarely see the diseases such as the ones we're immunizing against, because we have significantly high vaccination rates, it's sometimes difficult to convince people that, for example, tetanus diphtheria immunization is important because they don't know anyone who's personally had tetanus or diphtheria. Polio is somewhat easier in that it's more recent in the 1950s where there were problems with polio. If we explain to them the reason why we're immunizing them, we have information fact sheets which are given to parents which explains a little bit about the disease, so they understand that these diseases could resurface if people were not immunized. Generally, there isn't a lot of problem convincing them of the need for them. Actually, I find Prince Rupert a very interesting community because of the fact that it has many different distinct cultures, and the community that I came from was very much sort of more all the same sort of people, and it's really interesting to see the mix of the distinct cultural groups, the East Indians, the Portuguese, the Italians, the Oriental people, the Native community.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind to his heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our majesty within. I'm Rupert Pictou.